Thank you. Our speaker tonight is a research fellow and director of publications with PERC, which is the handle for Property and Environment Research Center. She is also a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. She has co-edited Accounting for Mother Nature, and most recently, she co-authored Greener Than Now, Are You Really an Environmentalist? She is primarily interested in the role of economic processes in shaping natural resource policy and in promoting market principles to a wide audience to help resolve environmental dilemmas. As part of this interest, she is expanding PERC reports into a full-fledged magazine that will serve as a leading voice of free market environmentalism. I almost forgot the main part of her bio is that she is married to Matt and they have 2 young children. And the 2 kids unanimously voted to let them come on their second honeymoon. Would you please give Laura Huggins a warm welcome?
Thank you so much, Mr. Sweeney, and the rest of the NASA crew. I guess actually that sounds like astronauts, huh? But, and especially thank you to Rick for inviting me here. I had the opportunity to meet Rick last year, and he has this wonderful way of saying really pessimistic things in an optimistic way. It's a rare talent. And what a pleasure it is to be able to actually give talk about the environment here in this setting, like Rick said. It's fantastic. Speaking of settings, I was out on the beach yesterday, and a couple of guys asked me if I was from Canada. And I think that's due to the whiteness of my legs, but I'm actually not from Canada, but I live just about 3 hours away from Canada, in Montana. And this is you can't really see it too well, but this is a picture from last week at Big Sky. I bring this photo in for 2 reasons. First, to say once again, I'm so happy to thaw out. And secondly, I just want you to see where I live. I chose to live here because I consider myself an environmentalist. I ski, I hike, I rock climb 2 days a week. You know, we take our kids camping. I started out as an environmental studies major, kind of going the typical course, member of the Sierra Club. At one point I had the 2 long braids and everything. No bandana though. And you know, the typical course of an environmentalist is to preach, lobby, sue, regulate. And that started to just feel wrong to me. And so I started reading authors like Ayn Rand, who I was very happy to see in my hotel room. Her books were the only 2 books available in the room. And Hayek and Friedman, and I started to think about the environment a little bit differently. And I think through clearer lenses instead of this sort of green haze that I was looking through. And that's why I get upset on every Earth Day. We've got 48 hours to go now. Listen to the media, and you're going to hear these sort of catastrophic claims about the Earth. I just heard one recently by the director of Avatar, Cameron, who said, you know, if we don't do something about global warming now, we're all going to effing die. And he's wrong, and I know he's wrong, because if you look back for 40 years, they've been wrong. Every single Earth Day, but they use the fear factor because it's a powerful tool. So let me go back in time here. We're going to start with the first Earth Day, and then we'll go forward. So just bear with me for a bit here. These are predictions from that first Earth Day in 1970. We have Barry Commoner. I don't know if you remember. He actually ran for president in the 80s. I think his platform was actually resource socialism. But here he says, we are in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of the nation and of the world as a suitable place of human habitation. Of course, we're all still alive here today. And then we have Ken Watt, UC Davis. He's giving a talk at Swarthmore, I believe. He actually predicts that the Earth will be 11 degrees colder by 2000. We will be in an ice age. Of course, that didn't come true. Then we have a New York Times editorial talking about man must stop pollution, or we will face, a possible extinction. If you look at pollution in the United States, air quality has been improving dramatically for the past 40 years. I'm not making this up. You can go visit the Environmental Protection Agency website yourself. Water quality has been improving. We've been expanding the total amount of land under conservation, and our fisheries are now starting to improve. Let me go into depth on one more. My favorite prophet of gloom, Paul Ehrlich. I'm assuming some of you are familiar with him. He wrote The Population Bomb in 1968, and then a revised version where he fixed a lot of things in 1972. And so let's just play Mythbusters for a minute. Are you all familiar with that show?
Yes.
It's the only show my brother watches, so I have to watch it so that I can communicate with him, but they like to blow things up. So anyway, Paul Ehrlich, he predicts back in 1970 we will be more than 7 billion by 2000. We will have massive famines that will occur by 1980. So we can't exactly blow it up, but we can definitely defuse the bomb. By 2000, there were 6 billion people, nearly 30% fewer than he predicted. Let me get ahead to my notes. Average fertility rates have dropped dramatically from 6 children per woman in the 1960s to 2.8 today. Total fertility rates for 80 countries are below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. That's for 80 countries. The Bahamas, I believe, at 2.13. So you're barely replacing yourself, so you're doing okay. And if present trends were to continue from today, we'd actually peak at 2040 and then start to decline in population. You don't hear those statistics in Al Gore's work, but they're there on the United Nations website. So what about famine? Of course, we had the Green Revolution come along. World population doubled from 1960. It was at 3 billion. And then at 2000, it was up to 6 billion. At that same time, daily calorie consumption in poor countries increased by almost 40%. So where do all these people go wrong? It's hard for me to stand still, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to not trip myself and be calm. And why are they sometimes called neo-Malthusians? And to answer that question, we have to go back in time even further, about 200 years back. We have the lovely Reverend Thomas Malthus here, who argued that human population growth would run into constraints imposed by fixed natural resources. And he did some mathematic modeling. But the problem was, he viewed humans like a herd of deer. And deer, when they run out of food, they do starve sometimes. But people, we actually have 2 hands and a brain, right? We don't act that way. So the question is really, are resources really finite? And it depends on how you look at it. And I suggest that Paul Ehrlich here on the left walk across Stanford campus and meet Paul Romer over at the Hoover Institution, where I spend some of my time. And Paul Romer is known for the new growth theory. And here's what he has to say about finite resources. Every generation has perceived the limits to growth that finite resources and undesirable side effects would pose if no new recipes or ideas were discovered. And every generation has underestimated the potential for finding new recipes and ideas. Our ultimate resource, in short, is our mind. Let's fast forward real quick here to the 1980s. On Earth Day, the theme was a new challenge for the new decade. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think it means more regulation based on what I saw in the 1980s. And we actually now have Jimmy Carter making an official proclamation about Earth Day, that we should all be embracing it, and we should be embracing the nation's environmental goals, specifically the National Environmental Policy Act. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that is sort of the Magna Carta of environmental regulation. And So I kind of like this joke here. What it did is it creates environmental impact statements. On average, those statements are 600 pages long. This is every time you go to do an environmental project. It takes about 2 years for the government to review, and then it goes to the courts. It basically creates an enormous logjam in the entire system. So you might ask, well, what's so wrong with regulation, right? If our air quality is getting better, our water's improving. But we always have to ask at what cost and with what constraints. Some of the best economists out there have argued that the U.S. could have achieved our present level at a quarter of the cost. And they've also showed long-term trends that show air quality was improving at the same rate before the Clean Air Act hit as after. And same with water quality. Just going to move on to 1990. This really surprised me. This is a new talk for me, so I was looking up some research, doing a little research, and landfill space was actually the #1 issue in 1990. I can see that being an issue here in the Bahamas, but not in the United States. We have Al Gore, of course, commenting on this. He seems to always be in on the action. We have Isaac Asimov. Almost all the existing landfills are reaching their minimum capacity, and we are running out of places to put new ones. One of the scholars, Dan Benjamin at PERC, where I spend most of my time, has spent the last 20 years looking at garbage, landfills, recycling. We actually call him the trash man. And he estimated that all of the garbage in the United States could be fit into Ted Turner's ranch, which is 30 miles from where we live, for the next century, with 50,000 acres left over for his bison. It's a 110,000 acre ranch, that gives you a sense. The National Solid Waste Management Association, this is what they have to say about landfill space. 1995, we stood at 14 years, 2001, 18 years, 2010, it's up to 20 years. Why? They're getting bigger, they're getting more efficient, they're run by private corporations. They're actually turning trash into gas now, creating heat, creating energy. One of the best examples, I think, is the Fresh Kills landfill. I don't know if you've heard of that in New York City. It was one of the biggest in the world, at one point reaching 17 stories high. It's been closed for 10 years now, and guess what they're doing with it? They're creating a giant park, and they're creating energy for Staten Island. So these huge concerns are actually have been turned into assets in a way now. And now on to our favorite topic, global warming. 2000, green starts to be in, right? We've got DiCaprio. Sorry, honey, I had to put him up there. The eco-hunk. And he's starting to make claims. All sorts of celebrities are starting to make claims about Earth Day. He was actually the host for Earth Day in D.C. And making the typical predictions that you hear about. Typhoons, hurricanes, floods, insect-borne diseases, and now recently I've even heard the volcano is due to global warming. I couldn't resist this photo, and I hope none of you are fans of Al Gore, but so is the global warming hype running out of greenhouse gas? Is every scare that we hear discrediting the movement, especially when it's coming from celebrities, and then pile that on top of the ClimateGate scandal, on top of the Copenhagen fiasco, and what are we seeing? Well, I believe it is starting to backfire, and that concerns me. People are losing their interest in the environment. We got a recent Gallup poll reported that global warming was a bit of a yawn to most Americans. We got Pew survey listing global warming as number 20 in the top 20 issues. So it's starting to lose some steam. So I'm just going to skip over it. Just kidding. What do we actually know? We know the Earth's temperature has risen about 1 degree Celsius over the last 100 years. We know we can't stop it. Even if emissions were zero, we can't stop it. We know that cutbacks can increase human poverty and suffering. And we know that global warming is only one of the problems confronting humanity. There's an author, Bjorn Lomborg, who wrote a book, Cool It. I would encourage you to read it What he did is he got a bunch of economists from all over the world. I think 5 of them were Nobel laureates, and they figured out what the biggest problems of the world are today. And global warming was one of them. They had 23, I believe. And then they ranked them based on the solutions they had, like dollar for dollar, what made the most sense. And global warming came in last. Not to say that it's not an issue, but to say that we don't have any good solutions, especially government solutions for global warming. Rather, things that we can fight are malaria, which half the world is actually exposed to. There were 250 million cases of malaria last year, just to give you a sense. 1 million, mostly children, died of malaria. That's something we could spend a lot less than we're spending on global warming, which is in the trillions, and have a huge impact. Or HIV/AIDS, 1 million people died of AIDS last year, and that's the most productive section of society that we're losing. But if we are going to keep spending the trillions on global warming, maybe we should refocus a bit. Rather than carbon rationing, maybe we should keep working on R&D. And last few years, money has been going down for research and development, when we should be thinking about how can we create solar panels at a cheap enough price that India can buy them. That would have a huge impact. Or what about nuclear power that has 0 emissions? Or preparing to adapt and cope with the effects of global warming. I mean, even creating wheat and corn crops that are drought resistant. I put up this photo of the grapes just because there are countries that are already adapting. I guess grapes are like the canary in the coal mine for global warming. They're very sensitive to temperature. So of course Germany is now producing more Merlot, more Cab, and doing quite well, sort of stealing the profits from France. I'm going to move on from global warming for now. So here we are, Earth Day 2010. Given that the global warming hype is running out of gas right now, the real focus we're seeing right now is on green jobs. Here on Earth Day Network, just a couple days ago, green jobs are a win-win-win for the economy, the worker, and the environment. We have Van Jones, a former White House green jobs guru, stating, "We imagine formerly incarcerated people moving from jail cells to solar cells, helping to harvest the sun, heal the land, and repair their own souls." Well, that all sounds nice, but if you're kind of thinking it sounds too nice to be good to be true, I think you're right. We've had a couple senior fellows at PERC team up with a bunch of other fellows in the United States, and they looked at the 4 major proposals out there pushing for green jobs. And they came up with a whole list of myths, but I just want to run through a few with you. Myth 1, creating green jobs will boost productive employment. Fact, green jobs estimates using poor models based on dubious assumptions included huge numbers of administrative positions that do not produce much output. Myth, the world economy can be remade by reducing trade, relying on local production, and lowering consumption without decreasing our standard of living. Fact, no nation can produce everything citizens need or desire. I'm sure you're very aware of that here in the Bahamas. Myth, government mandates are a substitute for free markets. Fact, of course, companies are quicker to react to the demands of customers and the market than they can to government mandates. And even more interesting to me are these unstated trade-offs that we don't hear about. One of the major studies that they looked at was the Center for American Progress, and they reported if $100 billion is spent on green activities, 935,200 jobs would be directly created. This is what they don't tell you. That's $107,000 per new job. That's sending someone to college for 4 years. So it's always important to think about this. And then list one other study coming out of Spain. They're way ahead of the United States on green energy, green jobs. This team of scholars estimated, it was led by one guy, Dr. Gabriel Cazada, they created 50,000 green jobs. They spent $38 billion to create those. 760,000 jobs. 760,000 per job. Green jobs drained resources out of other parts of the economy and raised energy prices, causing several companies to leave. And in the end, for every one job they created, they estimated that 2.2 other jobs were lost. So what are these lessons from 40 years of being wrong? Sky is not falling, as we can see by the chickens here. And I think ultimately this tactic doesn't serve environmentalists, as we're seeing the whole global warming meltdown right now. People start to get a little weary of the politics that goes on in science, of people telling them over and over about things that just they're not seeing, they're not happening, like population, like acid rain was a big scare, like landfill space. And I want to say this fear tactic, environmental organizations use this very well to promote their false fears because they're huge. I mean, they need to fund themselves. The Sierra Club, for example, has more than 400 offices in the United States. It's like a giant bureaucracy, basically. And then the most important point that I really want to bring up is that in this state of fear, decisions are not based on fact. And what happens is, people pressure politicians and then they make more regulations, which might actually hinder the process in the long run. So, red tape doesn't fix green problems. I like this quote by Aldo Leopold. He wrote Sand County Almanac. He's one of the godfathers of the environmental movement. He says, "At what point will government conservation, like the mastodon, become handicapped by its own dimensions?" And I think, when people like to talk about tipping points right now, and I worry that perhaps we're on a tipping point for resource socialism. These government agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency, has gotten so enormous. We can never rein them back in. It truly is the Leviathan. I mean, just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, we read that government in general has doubled its size from 2000 to 2010. And that's something that really scares me. So what's an alternative? Let me introduce free market environmentalism. This is kind of what most people think of free market environmentalism when I bring it up. The Starbucks on top of Thomas Jefferson's head, or maybe a Disney ride next to Yellowstone. But that's not really it, luckily. So just in a nutshell, pretty basic: incentives matter, property rights matter, price matters, trade matters, and wealth matters. All right, let me start with the Endangered Species Act. Somehow my boss got this photo. I don't know how. I've never asked him, but the Endangered Species Act, despite the good intentions, actually turned endangered species into a liability for many landowners. And endangered species in the United States reside on mostly private land. About 70 to 75% are on private land. Well, what happens when you find an endangered species on your land is all of a sudden you're under this barrage of regulation, right? And if you produce timber or cattle or something like that, it's a huge liability because pretty soon your land's worth nothing. And so in Montana we call it the shoot, shovel, and shut up syndrome. People, and it's common. People refer to it as that. They find a critter that they don't like and they make it disappear. So what's the solution to this problem? This is a study that PERC put out, and it's on the red-cockaded woodpecker. It lives in the southern United States in longleaf pine trees, which are harvested for timber. And what we found, this is actually Dean Luke headed up this project, is when colonies get close to the private lands, they actually harvest the timber at a much earlier age. 17 years of age when the endangered species colonies are close by, when it should be more like 60 years of age. So here's the solution actually to this problem. And this is the Wolf Compensation Trust. This was started by a guy named Hank Fisher, and Hank thought that there's got to be a way to compensate people for their loss and turn species back into an asset, not a liability. And so he works on with PERC, come up with this concept. And what they do is when a rancher loses a cow or sheep due to a wolf, just doing what canines do best, then the Defenders of Wildlife pays that rancher for that loss. This has been enormous success, all funded by private donations. They've paid out over $1 million so far, and now they've started a grizzly compensation trust as well. The next one, Property Rights Matter. And we have a book. You're supposed to have 50 copies here today to give to y'all for free, but we sent it via the U.S. Postal Service, so it's not here yet. We should have gotten FedEx. Anyway, in Greener Than Now, you could get a copy eventually from Rick. We have a chapter called No One Washes a Rental Car. And I think Rick's getting nervous right now because we're borrowing his car. But the idea is if you don't own your car, think about how you treat a rental car. I mean, I'm guilty of maybe turning it in dirty or getting in without brushing the sand off of you, or maybe hitting a few potholes, seeing if it can get a little air. Don't worry, Rick. We didn't jump the fit. But that's the same principle applies to natural resources. If you don't own it, people don't tend to treat it as well. And we call this a tragedy of the commons. I'm trying to give you an example here of the fisheries that you can all relate to. If I'm correct, I'm learning slowly about the Bahamas, but I think you experienced a tragedy of the commons with your sponge fishery here in the 1930s, completely collapsed. A similar situation was going on in Alaska with the halibut fishery, down here on the bottom right, in the late 80s. The halibut were facing a lot of pressure, so the government kept trying to make more regulations, trying to help the situation, but it actually made the situation worse. And they got down to the point where they had one 48-hour season for the whole year. And people went out, and they got bigger boats, and they got more sophisticated boats, and they went out no matter what. I mean, it was a big storm. I actually lost a second cousin to this. People were dying, completely wiping out the fish stock, plus driving the price down because they would glut the market. And so what's the solution to this? And actually this came from the fishermen themselves being fed up. They worked with PERC, scholar Don Lill. We joined up with the Reason Foundation and also Environmental Defense Fund and tried to push individual fishing quotas. And what that does is it creates, in the sense, a property rights system over the whole fishery. They take the total catch share, and they divide it up amongst the fishers, I should say. And under the first year of IFQs, or catch shares, the 2-day season was expanded to 8 months. The death toll to 8 months. The death tolls dropped to 0. They got higher prices for the catch, and the bycatch was reduced. We had a fisherman, Pete Halme, come and talk at PERC, and he talked about how the system works now. And they actually have a credit card, debit card they have on the boats. And what happens with bycatch, sometimes they'll be looking for halibut, but they'll catch, say, rockfish instead. Well, rather than throwing them overboard, they can run this card on their boat, and they can see if somebody else has a share of rockfish, which is actually also under IFQ now, and they can buy it right there on the boat. And so that's really helped the fishery, because they used to have to throw it overboard before they got to port. Chances are there's about an 80% chance that fish would die. And the great thing now is that catch share programs have spread all over the United States. There are now 15 within the last basically 15 years. Worldwide, there are now 121 catch share programs. This year in Science magazine, they claim that catch shares, property rights to the ocean, are actually the salvation for the world's fisheries. Real quick on trade and price matter, because I think this audience understands that well. But where we live in the western United States, water is a scarce commodity, and so there's always been a lot of fighting over it, hence this quote by Mark Twain. In the old days, it used to be that the fights were between miners and ranchers for water. Today, the fight is between farmers and fish. And PERC actually started out, the place I spend most of my time, 30 years ago trying to develop water markets so that willing sellers, willing buyers could trade water and the price would go up and the commodity water would be more valued. And back then, there were no state regulations kept that from happening. Today, 10 Western states have changed their laws so that water transactions can occur. They can be leased, they can be a split lease, they can be a sell. And so what we've seen is the price of water go up. We've seen thousands of transactions over the past 10 years. We've actually conserved enough water for fish. Just to give you a sense, you could cover the state of New Hampshire with about a foot of water. 6 million acre feet, I'm sorry. And then wealth matters. You've all heard wealthier is healthier, but richer is greener. And sometimes that's a hard concept for people to wrap their hands around. We had last year the president of Bolivia speaking at the UN on Earth Day actually said society cannot put its own narrow interest above those of the earth. It is capitalism which is responsible for this crisis. And I feel like actually physically ill when I hear that because all the evidence suggests the opposite. The tenets of capitalism create wealth, and wealth creates a cleaner environment. There's all sorts of indexes that show this. I just grabbed a couple. The one here on the right is done by Yale and Columbia, and they look at all sorts of environmental indicators. I think they look at 25, and then they pair that with GDP, and you see that environmental quality goes up as GDP goes up. On the left, this is kind of blurry. I'm sorry about that as it's projected, but this is known as Kuznets curves. Basically saying the same thing. As income goes up, so does environmental quality. The guy by the name of Bruce Yandel's been pitching this for 15 years now. Just recently, he was featured in the New York Times and in the Washington Post. And in the Post, I like the point that they bring up is that emissions in China are actually higher than the U.S. now, even though the U.S. economy is 3 times bigger than China. So we all have seen Kermit. We know Kermit and his famous line, "It isn't easy being green." And I think for the mainstream economists that's true, or the mainstream environmentalists that's true. But I think he might not have found it so hard to be green had he discovered markets and had he discovered that they're actually a frog's best friend. And that's what we spend the majority of our time at our think tank doing. We bring enviropreneurs. We've trademarked the word, so don't take it from us. Enviropreneurs or eco-capitalists, we bring them in from all over the world, and we try to teach them about markets, property rights, contracts, how you can blend markets with the environment, and we've had some amazing participants doing things all over the world. One example that I just was aware of, one of our fellows, our enviropreneurs, Joe C., he was doing a project in Florida that I thought you all might find interesting, but he's actually helping start up a company called Eternal Reefs. And this was featured in CNN, and they take people that wish to be buried in the sea when they die. They take their ashes, turn it into a reef, and then lower it down, building a bigger and bigger reef. They've done 300 so far, and then they live on amongst the fish. You can go down and visit their bodies. You can scuba dive down. I mean, that's kind of far out there, but I wanted to give you a sense of just the opportunities that are possible when you mix markets with the environment. So let me just leave you with this quote by John Muir, who was indeed the godfather of the environmental movement. That he founded the Sierra Club. And he says, "The morning stars still sing together, and the world they made is still being made and becoming more beautiful every day." So with that, happy Earth Day. I think we should actually celebrate. I'm happy to answer questions, or if I'm holding you up from the bar, I'll just be here enjoying this beautiful spot. Yes.
Since I'm 80 years old, how do I become...
You told me you were 39.
That was yesterday.
When I got here.
The question is, how do I become a reef?
Externalreefs.com. Your last wish to die with a fish. Externalreefs.com.
I thought that was a medical society.
What does that mean?
Oh, well, you will make a contribution to marine conservation rather than spending money for a coffin and for the cement that goes around the coffin and for the toxins that go into your body when you die.
It's a question of where your ashes go.
Yeah. They actually do, they put the ashes in the reef structure, the man-made structure they then lowered. You should check it out.
Let me try a question. I'm rather puzzled that certainly over the last 35, let's say 40 years, the scientific community or science has abandoned the traditions of Aristotle, the traditions of Sir Francis Bacon, known as scientific method. Most of us were taught that sometime in our schooling, in our education. This has been substituted by what? Deductive reasoning, making facts fit what you want them to fit, as rather than, in effect, using a scientific hypothesis. How can this happen? How can the scientific community permit this, for lack of a better word, potential fraud be thrust on everyone on this earth, right on down to our friend from Bolivia?
Right, I think you're right. I mean, any time there's trillions of dollars involved, there's problems, right? Government, science, they get funded by governments. They get funded by the people that are paying this. And I think, I mean, they probably want to be good scientists, but they quickly lose track of the problem. I think you're right on. I mean, ClimateGate, obviously, we see that politics is everywhere.
Then are you saying that scientists can be bought and sold on the market of thought?
I'm afraid so. Unfortunately, I think that's the case sometimes. Obviously, not all.
Then what is the value of scientific method then?
I mean, one thing that I think one positive thing that ClimateGate has brought to us is a little bit more transparency. And the hope is that if all of this climate research starts to become more transparent, then you'll get a lot of scientists, a lot of people looking at these numbers, and hopefully the good science will float to the top.
Thank you.
Could you maybe comment on how, especially among governments, but also among private organizations related to the environment, there's been an emphasis on recycling, reduce, reuse, recycle, especially in the building industry with the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED certification. All they look at is the recyclability of the product. They don't look at its life, how it's maintained, and that perhaps with free markets, that view could be expanded to include other aspects that would maybe contribute to better environmental health and conservation.
You're right. I mean, I love these questions because you just kind of you gave the answer.
I didn't think so. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's perfect. I mean, the problem is that a lot of times with recycling, we don't look at the whole picture. You know, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Right? Recycling is a manufacturing process, right? And so it takes a lot to recycle. So I mean, I think the answer is that you just have to be careful. You have to look at every single project, you know. And apparently what I hear from this LEED certification is it's very, very easy to get. It's sort of a fraud in a way. It's a tax break. Exactly. So obviously there's built-in problems in that.
How do you reconcile your views with the fact that with the polar ice caps melting, we're getting the extinction of the polar bear, and they say the elevator current that keeps England warm is going to stop when the ice caps go away. Like, aren't those real concerns?
You know, I'm not a climate scientist. I don't know. I'm a political scientist. But, you know, even if they are concerns, I mean, my point that I'm trying to make here today is just that government solutions are not the most efficient solution. So, yeah, you know, let's look at the private sector and first to figure out if those are real problems, what that means, if it's just a trend, you know, that's come and gone over many, many centuries. And if so, I think we need to let markets do what they do best, let individuals find solutions.
Can I make a comment on that?
Or
The ice, just a quick comment. The ice masses in Antarctica, you know, the South Pole, the other side from the north, are the largest today than they've ever been in the history of Earth.
I don't think so.
Yes, sir.
I mean, there's just so much information out there is the point that it's hard to know what the truth is.
And the polar bears are doing very well.
One question here, and one question.
I'll let Rick.
One question here, and then here.
Okay.
From the reading I've done and the studies that I've done in climatology, it's my
Oh, good.
understanding.
A real climate scientist here.
Well, not really, but I have studied it somewhat. And what I understand is that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere from ice core samples going back thousands of years has actually in the past has been greater than it has now. The days of dinosaurs and what have you, but we don't know what catastrophes took place then.
Right.
And you know, because we got ice ages come in and go out as time went by. But for the last few thousands of years, it's been fairly stable at 540 parts per million carbon. In the last 200 years, it now has hit 840. And it seems to be growing by about 2 or 3 parts per million a year at the moment. So I didn't understand how you could have said what you did, which was that even if we shut off emissions completely, that it would continue to grow, where the record seems to show before, the industrial civilization, it was fairly stable for a couple of thousand years at least.
Well, the numbers I'm looking at, and I'm basing this on people like Bjorn Lomborg and Indor Golklani at Cato and Steve Hayward at AEI, but they're saying that the man-made effect on that is only very small.
Right. Right. It is. It's not
Right.
by no means as exaggerated as they're making it out to be.
Right. I mean, I think the bigger point to make that I want to make tonight is if I can look into the crystal ball, which I hate to do after bashing people in the past 40 years for doing, but even if you look just 15 years ago, right, we wouldn't imagine that almost a lot of people have laptops to be carrying around, that we'd have cell phones, people in Africa are doing mobile banking, that we now have TVs that are 3D, and I think in the next 15 years, I'm willing to bet we'll have a different kind of car that doesn't produce emissions. You know? I'm rationally optimistic, I guess.
Well, I think you need to give credit where credit is due. I mean, the fact that you can quote and say that we have water quality in the United States and air quality have improved is only because people have had a conservation awareness and have moved towards a more greener things. And so you can't discount that. And they did that because of an awareness that we were using so much of our resources and going ahead much too fast and put the brakes on that. And even if they did it through government, I mean, I know you all there's a problem with that, it was done. It was done. After 40 years, you can say what you just said.
You're right. I mean, they brought attention to it. My point was at what cost, and then also, I mean, just the bigger point in terms of the wealthier is healthier and richer is greener. Is, you know, once
I think
once people's bellies are full, they can think about the environment and they can think about all these things.
It's not to be discounted. I mean, those things, human action did make those things possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Regarding the extinction of species, the story about elephants in South Africa, sorry, in Southern Africa, it's very interesting. Can you?
Yeah, are you talking about Campfire, that whole program? Okay, yeah. In Southern Africa, the system is different in that people can actually own the animal, and so they've started. They have hunting down there for species, and my boss, Terry Anderson, is an avid hunter. He's also an avid environmentalist. And what happens is he goes down to, say, South Africa. He pays a very large fee to kill a warthog, say. Wouldn't be my choice, but he just got a warthog. And then that fee goes to local communities to then create the incentive for local communities to value the species. And with the elephant, we've seen the numbers rise dramatically, actually for most of the species.
Instead of poaching to get the
right, exactly. Instead of poaching, it used to be they get money for the tusks, exactly, and now they get money from the hunters. So they just changed the incentive structure.
So don't you think the real point is that we all really need to get together on this and hear you and everybody else and see what we can do to make it better all around? And you can see in China at the Olympics, for instance, in Beijing, the sky got blue. I could tell which photographs I took early on and late on by how blue the sky was.
And it's amazing how quickly that happened, because my mother was there a month before that. They made her wear a mask all over, and then we're actually seeing blue skies.
Children, we were told we had never seen a blue sky. They didn't know the skies were supposed to be blue. But we all get together here and there, and the environmental side and the industrial side, we can make it better. Because if we can make it bad, we're smart enough to make it.
I mean, I think that is the message, that there's hope, and we don't have to be so gloomy about it, and we can actually celebrate 40 years of being wrong and move forward.
So we don't have to worry about 2012 anymore?
Nah, if I'm gonna look at my ball again, I think you'll be okay.
Any other questions? I'll be with you. We'll be here for a while. Great. Thank you very much. Sorry. One more question, or two more questions.
Okay, and I'll be around too.
What suggestions would you give us as an island nation to convince the people of this country that this country is worth preserving?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, education would be a start. I mean, I have to say I was a little bit surprised when I drove through the middle of the island. I was actually trying to find the Herald Pond, and I ran into some sort of garbage dump and dead dogs. And I mean, there's a real disparity. I mean,
the whole island is a garbage dump.
I mean, there's a real disparity. I mean,
the whole island is a garbage dump.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to come about as people come out of poverty, and you know, what, 3/4 of your GDP is based on tourism. If that collapses, I think they realize that if that collapses, everything is gone, right?
But then even in poverty, you still have pride. I mean, the island hasn't always been wealthy, wealthy, wealthy. In fact, it's still poor people, but people have pride. We lost that. We need to regain that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just, from what I saw, it was kind of more of a, we need to fill our bellies before we can start thinking about the beauty of the island and all your wonderful natural resources that you have here. And I almost wonder if you could, I would like to see some entrepreneurs come into the island here and start up a turtle farm like they have in the Caymans, or butterfly farms. Or, there's all sorts of potential, actually, even I think in the middle of the island, which might draw some tourism money into the middle.
There was a lady too next.
Right.
No?
Do you think that, and that you mentioned something earlier about the Alaskan model for halibut? Was it halibut?
Yeah, good.
Right. Do you think that either one of those could be applied to maybe our grouper or our crawfish or even our conch, which are definitely, I mean...
I've heard that the conch are kind of moving further and further out, is that correct? Yes, there's models out there, and I would be, visit me after, and I'd be happy to send you some publications on it. But one model that comes to mind is for the spiny lobster, which it's kind of like the conch in a way. It doesn't move a lot. They catch it.
That's what we call crawfish. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's just a communication.
Okay. So off of the Baja, actually, they started, the fishermen themselves started this program. They divided the fishery into 9 cooperatives. and they assign property rights to each area. They then monitor themselves how many traps they put down. They pay a fee for enforcement, and they've had enormous success. And I'd be happy to send you some material on that. But basically creating rights, and so it's not just, you know, put my crawfish condominium wherever I please.
Who does the enforcement though? That's, I mean, it's private.
They do themselves. They put in money.
It's not a government.
They do coordinate some with the government, and as much as if they catch someone, the government has said they will prosecute. But this is a serious business. They buy. I've seen photos. They got the night vision goggles. They've got it all, and they take it very seriously. They have ownership, and they're cooperatives.
Yeah, well, crawfish tail retails for what? $17?
Right.
$12.
The point is there is a solution. There's a solution, and now's the time you should be thinking about it if the conch are moving out before it gets worse.
How would you promote investment in alternative technology?
What was that? I'm sorry.
How would you promote investment in alternative technology?
Look, I mean, in my opinion, companies have incentives to invest in it on their own because they stand to make a lot of money, I think, especially if the price of fossil fuels goes way up, and they're in position with alternative technology, then they're gonna be loving life.
So no incentive.
I don't think so. I think the incentive's there. Price. Thank you so much, and I'm going to stick around if you have more questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Laura mentioned, she has sent the book that she co-authored with Terry Anderson of PERC, Greener Than Now. It will arrive. If you please give us your P.O. box and your email address, we will make sure you get a copy. We only have 50 copies coming, so when they come, please sign up. Also, we've circulated a document. If you give us your email address, if you'd like to receive our weekly e-newsletter, we'd be happy to sign you up. A lot of you already have it, but we need your information for the book. We also need your money. Nothing in life is free. And this event is free for you guys to come in, but we put some little brochures on there. And I get the nasty task of saying, please send a check.
Oh, nicer on your knees.
Yeah, please send a check. I'm not above begging, I can assure you. It's my pleasure to...
The whole board, we can do it.
yeah, our board can do it. Oh, thank you, George. I appreciate that. Our president, Joan Thompson, couldn't make it tonight. Her husband's just come back from an operation, so she's trying to get him comfortable at home, and she apologizes for not being here. It's my pleasure to introduce another of our... George Borlandelli back there has been collecting money from you for the drinks. Dr. Sidney Sweeting, another board member, is with us, and Damien Forsyth, another board member, is coming to give Laura the vote of thanks. And thank you so much.
Laura, thanks again. You know, so often we have so many economists come and we focus on the economy, which is obviously very important, particularly here in the Bahamas with the challenges we have. But to look at the environment 2 days before Earth Day, I think is key, and to tie it into the economy and free markets as well.
Perfect, thank you, Dave.
So this is a great book showing the Bahamian environment.
That looks much nicer than my book.
It's very nice. So it's a great Bahamian photographer, and the commentary was done by this gentleman here, Larry Smith, so he can talk to you about it as well.
Perfect, perfect.
Look
Thank
this
you.
way, guys.
Thank you.